Formula One teams just got forced into the Monaco rule nobody can ignore. The FIA is cutting engine power from just 200 kilometers per hour. Not because a team cheated. Not because an engine failed. But because the new cars were projected to leave the Monaco tunnel at more than 310 kilometers per hour, on a circuit where the walls do not move, and one tiny mistake can destroy an entire weekend. And this is where everything changes. Mercedes loses part of its electric punch. Ferrari suddenly gets a race where grip matters more than raw power. McLaren sees the gap shrink. Red Bull gets a chance it was not supposed to have. And every driver now has to trust a car that will not deliver power the way it normally does. Because Rev 1 is not just an engine mode. It is the FIA admitting that the full force of these new Formula One cars cannot run free at Monaco. So the power fades early. The override button loses its bite. The active aero advantage disappears. And the most unforgiving race of the season becomes a trap for every team on the grid. If a team gets this wrong, it will not just lose speed. It could lose Monaco before the race even begins. Subscribe to the channel. At first, this sounds like a normal safety decision. Monaco is tight. The new cars are faster. The FIA saw the danger and forced the teams to slow down. Simple. But that simple version hides the real problem. Because Formula One cars are supposed to be fast. That is the entire point. Teams spend years chasing more speed, more power, more efficiency, more grip, and more performance from every inch of the car. Nobody builds a Formula One car to be careful. They build it to attack. But Monaco is different. Monaco does not reward blind aggression. Monaco does not forgive a car that arrives slightly too fast, slightly too unstable, or slightly out of rhythm. At most circuits, a driver can run wide, correct the car, lose a few tenths, and continue. At Monaco, the wall answers immediately. That is why the FIA's new engine mode matters so much. The issue was not speed everywhere. It was speed in the wrong places. The new cars can deliver a huge electric push from the motor generator unit kinetic. That system can produce 350 kilowatts of electrical power, which sounds like a cold engineering number, but the real meaning is simple. The car gets a massive shove. And at Monaco, that shove arrives on streets that were never designed for modern Formula One power. Imagine running through a narrow hallway, with walls close on both sides. Now imagine someone pushes you from behind just as the hallway bends. On a wide road, that push might help you go faster. In that hallway, it makes every step more dangerous. That is the Monaco problem. The FIA looked at the simulations and saw that the cars could leave the tunnel at more than 310 kilometers per hour if the active aerodynamic system opened in straight-line mode. That number changes the whole conversation. Because the Monaco tunnel is not just a famous part of the circuit. It is one of the most intimidating sequences in the sport. The driver enters darkness, commits to the line, holds the car steady, and then bursts back into daylight with the braking zone rushing toward them. There is no wide escape road waiting. There is no generous runoff. There is no soft place to make a mistake. There is only the next decision, the next wall, and the next fraction of a second. So the FIA had a choice. Let the cars run with their full new power, and accept a risk that looked too high. Or step in before the weekend, and force every team into a safer operating window. They chose to step in. But the way they did it is what creates the trouble. The FIA did not simply reduce the maximum electric power. The 350 kilowatts still exists in the regulation. The system is still there. The cars still have the same basic capability. Instead, the FIA changed when that power begins to fade. That is the detail most people will miss. And it is the detail that could decide Monaco. The mandatory engine mode is called Rev 1. Under the standard setting used at most circuits, the electric power begins reducing at around 290 kilometers per hour. That means the car keeps a strong electrical push deep into acceleration, when the driver is still trying to build speed. But at Monaco, under Rev 1, the power begins to fade at just 200 kilometers per hour. 200. That is the key number. For a normal road car, 200 kilometers per hour sounds extreme. For Formula One, it is not the end of the story. It is often the middle of the acceleration phase. The car is still pulling. The driver still expects the energy to help. The lap time is still being built. And now, at Monaco, that help starts disappearing much earlier. The car does not suddenly become slow. That is not the point. The problem is that it becomes different. And different is dangerous in Monaco. A driver builds trust through repetition. They feel how the car responds when they apply throttle. They learn when the electric power arrives, how strongly it arrives, and when it starts to disappear. They use that feeling to judge braking points, corner exits, and the confidence needed to skim close to the barriers. Change that feeling, and the whole lap changes. The driver may still be fast. The car may still be competitive. But the instinct is no longer exactly the same. And at Monaco, instinct is everything. There is no time to debate the car halfway through the tunnel exit. There is no room to wonder whether the rear will stay calm on the way up to Casino. There is no space to experiment with a different power delivery when the wall is already waiting. This is why every team is in trouble. Because every team has to make the new mode feel natural before qualifying, and Monaco qualifying is one of the most brutal tests in Formula 1. A driver cannot be 99% confident here. 99% is not enough. The lap demands complete trust. The brakes must be trusted. The steering must be trusted. The rear tires must be trusted. And now, the power curve must be trusted too. That is where Rev 1 becomes more than a safety tool. It becomes a pressure tool. The FIA forced the same rule onto the grid, but the consequences will not feel the same for every team. Mercedes will look at this and no part of its electric strength is being softened. The power still exists, but the clean advantage it could use at higher speeds is now limited earlier than usual. Ferrari will look at it differently. If raw power matters less, then Monaco becomes more about balance, traction, and confidence. That is exactly the kind of race where Ferrari can believe it has a real chance, especially if the car is strong in slow corners and stable under high downforce. McLaren will see the gap shrinking. Maybe not disappearing, but shrinking. And at Monaco, a smaller gap can be enough to turn a normal weekend into a fight for something much bigger. Red Bull will see a partial opening too. If its car still has instability in corners, Monaco can punish that badly. But if the power restriction brings the top teams closer together, then even a difficult car can become part of the story with the right qualifying lap. That is the strange thing about Monaco. It does not need to make the field equal. It only needs to make the leader slightly less comfortable. Because once the favorite becomes uncomfortable, everyone else drives differently. Rivals start to believe. Strategists become more aggressive. Drivers attack qualifying with more confidence. Teams that expected to defend suddenly start thinking about stealing track position. And track position at Monaco is almost everything. That is why the engine cut from 200 km per hour is so important. It is not just about a number on a technical sheet. It affects how teams think, how drivers feel, and how rivals behave. A team with the fastest car usually wants the race to feel predictable. Clean qualifying. Clean start. Clean air. Control the pace. Protect the tires. Respond to threats. But Rev 1 adds uncertainty before any of that can happen. The driver must learn a different energy profile. The engineers must make the car balanced with that profile. The strategists must calculate whether the car can still defend and attack when the usual power tools are reduced. And the rivals must decide how brave they want to be now that the strongest advantages have been compressed. That is where the trouble spreads beyond the front of the grid. Midfield teams also face risk. Traffic will be brutal. A slower car in the wrong place can destroy a qualifying lap. A driver who cannot fully trust the power delivery may lose the tiny margin needed to escape elimination. A team that misreads the new mode could start the race trapped behind cars it should have beaten. And once that happens, Monaco gives very little back. At another circuit, a mistake in qualifying can become a recovery drive. At Monaco, it can become a sentence. That is why the FIA's decision is so powerful. It changes the weekend before the weekend even begins. The cars will not arrive in their normal form. The drivers will not have the usual freedom. The engineers cannot simply apply the standard energy behavior and move on. Everyone must adapt to a version of Formula 1 built specifically for Monaco's limits. And the deeper question is unavoidable. If the new cars need this much control at Monaco, what does that say about the new era? Formula 1 wants technology. It wants electrical power, smarter systems, and advanced performance. But Monaco is asking a different question. Can the future of Formula 1 still fit inside the streets that made the sport legendary? That question will hang over the entire weekend. Because Rev 1 is not just a setting. It is a warning. A warning that speed without space becomes danger. A warning that power without predictability becomes risk. A warning that even the most advanced cars in the world still have to obey the oldest rule in Monaco. The wall always wins if the driver gets it wrong. And now every team must find out whether it can make this restricted version of the car feel fast, safe, and trustworthy before the most important qualifying session of the weekend begins. That is why the trouble is real. Not because the cars have lost all their power. Not because the teams have no answer. But because Monaco demands perfection, and the FIA has just changed the way every car delivers one of its most important weapons. The power starts fading early. The margins are smaller than ever. And every team is about to discover whether it can adapt before the walls expose the truth. But the engine power cut is only the first part of the story. Because while everyone focuses on Rev 1, the FIA has quietly done something even bigger. It has taken one of the most important ideas of the new Formula 1 era and switched it off for Monaco. Active aerodynamics. The system that was supposed to make these cars smarter. The system that lets the car change its aerodynamic behavior depending on the part of the lap. More grip when the driver needs control. Less drag when the car needs speed. A car that can almost reshape its own personality between corners and straights. But at Monaco, that future is banned. Completely. Not just limited. Not just controlled. Banned for the entire weekend. No active aero in qualifying. No active aero in the race. No straight line mode. No clever wing adjustment to reduce drag when the track opens up. No escape tool through the areas where teams might normally try to squeeze out extra speed. And that changes everything again. Because Rev 1 already takes away part of the electric punch from 200 km/h. But active aerodynamics would have been the other side of the performance equation. If the car loses some electrical push, maybe it can still gain speed by cutting through the air more efficiently. At Monaco, the FIA says no. Not here. Not this weekend. Not between these walls. That means the teams are not dealing with one restriction. They are dealing with a package. A mandatory engine mode that makes the power fade earlier. A full active aero ban that locks the cars into fixed high downforce behavior. And a circuit where passing is already so difficult that any small loss can become permanent. This is where the trouble becomes much deeper. Because Formula 1 teams do not build performance from one place. They build it from layers. Power, aerodynamics, tires, brakes, suspension, driver confidence, strategy, energy deployment. Each layer helps the next one. If one layer is weakened, the team can sometimes compensate with another. But Monaco now weakens two of the most important modern layers at the same time. Power deployment is restricted early. Aerodynamic flexibility disappears. So the teams have to find lap time somewhere else. And that somewhere else is the most unforgiving place possible. Mechanical grip, slow corner balance, traction, confidence over bumps, driver precision within inches of the wall. That sounds romantic. It sounds like classic Monaco. But for engineers, it is brutal. Because mechanical grip is not a magic button. You cannot simply decide to have more of it. It comes from how the tires work, how the suspension handles the bumps, how stable the car is under braking, how gently it puts power down on corner exit, and how much confidence the driver has to carry speed into blind sections. If any of that is wrong, Monaco exposes it. Immediately. A car that looks strong on a smooth circuit can feel nervous here. A car with great straight-line speed can feel trapped here. A car that needs space to recover time can look helpless here. That is why this FIA package is such a threat to the entire grid. Because it forces the teams away from the areas where technology usually creates distance, and toward the areas where the driver feels everything. Every bump, every snap, every hesitation, every tiny delay in the power delivery. And this is where the race becomes personal. Because a driver can understand a rule in a briefing. They can accept it in theory. They can listen to the engineers explain the energy curve, the derating point, the fixed aerodynamic setting, and the expected lap time loss. But once they are in the car, none of that matters unless the car feels trustworthy. If the car feels predictable, the driver will attack. If the car feels nervous, the driver will protect. And at Monaco, a driver who protects too much is already losing. That is the harsh reality. The lap demands commitment before the driver has proof that everything will work. Through Saint Devote, the car must turn cleanly without sliding wide. Up the hill, the driver needs confidence as the barriers tighten. Into Massenet, the entry is blind enough to punish doubt. At Casino, the car must be placed with precision. Down to Mirabeau, the braking must be clean. Through the hairpin, patience matters. Into Portier, the exit matters because the tunnel is waiting. Then the car enters the darkness, and everything becomes louder. The engine note, the airflow, the vibration, the driver's trust. And when the car fires out toward the braking zone, there is no room for uncertainty. That is why the FIA banned active aero. The governing body was not only worried about one car being fast on one straight. It was worried about what happens when electric power, aerodynamic efficiency, and Monaco's lack of margin all meet at the same time.